Kirstjen Nielsen is gone. President Trump apparently tweeted out before she could get her resignation letter out that she was gone. Absolutely undermined her in typical Trumpian fashion. He's not going to let people go on a nice note or an easy note. He's going to do it his way on Twitter because, by golly, so many of his supporters are angry, they're mad, and let's be mean to people. That's the world in which we're living under the Trump regime right now. Kirstjen Nielsen was confirmed on December 5th, 2017 as the Secretary of Homeland Security. She was Chief of Staff to General John Kelly before that when he was Secretary of Homeland Security. She's a former Principal Deputy White House Chief of Staff to President Donald Trump. And she's the one who, because of people like Stephen Miller and everybody else, put in place this family separation policy where we still have thousands of kids separated from their families. It's going to take years, according to our government, to find and match the kids back to their parents. Who in their right mind ever thought, hey, let's rip kids apart? Okay, well, first off, I get the kind of evil thinking that is behind that, because General Kelly liked that too, which was, hey, if we rip kids from the arms of their parents, that's going to send a message so they won't come here. Has that worked? No. We actually have a larger influx of migrants from Central America than ever. And Kirstjen Nielsen was about to get fired last year, is what the rumor is. And then that's why she fired the tear gas at people coming toward the border, and that satisfied Trump long enough. And apparently, according to Washington Post reporting, and I quote, two senior administration officials said that Nielsen had no intention of quitting when she went to the meeting on Sunday with the president, and that she was forced to step down. Trump told aides last fall he wanted to fire her, but she appeared to regain her footing after U.S. Border Patrol agents used tear gas to repel a large crowd attempting to break through a border fence. Well, the president lies on a daily basis about who is coming to the border. He mischaracterizes who they are. The overwhelming majority right now are families from Central America who are fleeing economic insecurity, food insecurity, and violence, which up until Attorney General Jeff Sessions changed the rules on how we view asylum because of pressure from President Trump, those people would have qualified for asylum. And if you check out on the webpage or Instagram or whatever, I took down former Border Patrol Chief Mark Morgan on this exact topic when he very deceitfully said, oh, look at how few asylum claims are granted. These aren't refugees. Yeah, they are, until you change the rule and don't give them due process. So that's what's happening. And then the president lies and says, oh, these are big, heavyweight fighters. Yeah, that's because the cartels are involved. Why are the cartels involved? Because of human trafficking, because of drug trafficking. And why are those things happening? Because of us. We need people working here. I've talked about this in previous episodes. But Kirstjen Nielsen is gone. And here's the problem. She should hang her head in shame that she even tried working with this administration, and that she tried covering for President Trump with his it's hate. It just is. Look, it's one thing to say we're a sovereign nation, we have a border, we have a right to know who's coming and going. It's another thing to say let's be as mean as possible to try and stop people from coming here, which, by the way, as again we have shown, doesn't work. It's not working. So she's gone. And here's what's worse, though, for the people who are celebrating the departure of Kirstjen Nielsen. And while I agree she's done some things I fundamentally disagree with as Secretary of Homeland Security, the next people are worse. The next, Stephen Miller is the guy who is so desperate to be as mean and as resentful as possible. We are becoming authoritarian. We are becoming like the ultra-nationalist right-wingers of Europe. Viktor Orban of Hungary. Build a fence, build a wall, punish anybody who even tries to come here. That's the approach in places like Hungary. It's not okay. That's not who we are. That's not the values we stand in. We are a country of immigrants. And before you say, oh, but it's all legal immigrants. Well, that is a new thing. keep that in mind, that is relatively new. People hated the Irish, people hated the Germans, people hated the Jews, people hated the Japanese, the Chinese. We hated everybody because the incumbent people is the in-group, out-group theory that I keep talking about, the othering that happens. You're not worried about the legality of people coming here. You don't want change. We're short on workers and everything else, but I don't want Stephen Miller in charge, and I fear for what happens next with Kirstjen Nielsen actually stepping out and people like Kevin I can't say his name, McAleenan taking over temporarily. The Trump administration is pure chaos. Again, a couple of days before the election, I said vote for Hillary Clinton is a vote for stability. A vote for Donald Trump is a vote for instability. This is the worst kind of instability where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, the others get hurt, and we become less civilized. We don't want to live in that world. Trust me. That's how people die. That's how millions of people die. That's how we become a horrible country where we're just awful to one another that ultimately leads to death. And that's not where we want to live. I don't. Do you really? That doesn't make sense to me. So, and then last night, speaking of blondes getting axed, I watched that HBO show with my wife, the Inventor, about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. And this was a story, I already knew most of the story. I didn't know all the detail and some of the interesting twists that were done. Very, very well done show. I really recommend you watch it on HBO, The Inventor. Well done. Because I knew this story. I'd talked about it for years. There's so much wrong with the Theranos story. And let me tell you what's right about it first, because I want to start off on the positive note. I actually agree with Elizabeth Holmes that I want the ability through a finger poke to be able to determine diseases. So it's cheap, it's easy, it's readily available. I can do it from home, all that kind of stuff. There are companies that are working on these things. Most of them still work with regular labs. And I've done that. I did a food sensitivity test. I did a finger poke at home, mailed it in. 5 business days later, I had my results. I found out I'm not supposed to eat cashews, which I already knew. I didn't know it factually. And then I had a blood test that confirmed it. So I'm with her on that. But fraud, the 1%, the established system of wealthy, mostly white people who, if you know the right people, your idea suddenly gets hundreds of millions of dollars of funding and government contracts. This is what Occupy Wall Street was all about. This is why I support people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Ro Khanna, and others. The system itself needs to change. We have billionaires that think of themselves as lords and the rest of us as serfs, and they can do whatever they see fit. And we should just deal with it. And this is the ultimate story of exactly that. When you watch this movie, Elizabeth Holmes came from a privileged family, an upbringing of wealth in Palo Alto. She went off to Stanford. She was a nerd. She was smart. That's great. There are tons of smart people, but it's who you know, how you're connected. And this is what's so weird and broken about the system is she came from a family of wealth, and she was connected, and she was blonde, and she speaks with a deeper voice. Now, this is something that's different in terms of the take on how Elizabeth Holmes got so connected. I'm going to get into the whole Occupy Wall Street and that angle of it too, but hear me out on this one. As one who had to go through a full battery of hearing tests last year, and the early stages of losing your hearing, what you lose is this range where most girls speak literally as my hearing begins this slow journey from listening to way too much heavy metal and hard rock and going to concerts and listening to loud music for so many years, and then wearing headphones as a talk radio host for hours at a time during the day. Your hearing slowly fades. Those little hairs on the eardrum wear off. And the range that you lose is we're girls, we're women, like my daughter, my wife, where they speak. When there's noise in the background, I can't hear them. I literally can't hear them. Elizabeth Holmes speaks in a lower octave. And all of these investors, nearly all of these investors, are older men who all have some early signs at a minimum of hearing loss. And some of them, like former Secretary of State George Shultz, wears hearing aids. So he has most likely lost this range of hearing. Listen to Elizabeth Holmes speak.
I believe the individual is the answer to the challenges of healthcare.
Now, that's not quite Kathleen Turner, but she speaks in a lower octave. These guys could hear her when she makes her pitches. But let's be just absolutely blunt. She only got funded because she was well connected in Silicon Valley. And this is what is really, truly broken. You talk about systemic inequality that is reinforced generation after generation. This is actually a perfect example of it. When the key people behind investing in her company, they're Stanford University alumni, distinguished military veterans, Tim Draper, a billionaire. Oh, I'm friends with their family, and Larry Ellison, Rupert Murdoch. These people all got caught up in it. David Boies, Richard Kovacek, former CEO of Wells Fargo, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz was friends with these people. They all knew each other. So somebody in, rural India may have a way better idea and actually have some engineering knowledge and some chemistry knowledge and understand how to pull this off. And they're not getting the attention of these billionaires and getting hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. Oh, wait, you think I'm making that up for a second? Let me tell you about a company that actually exists, that's actually created something. It's nowhere near as advanced as what Theranos was promising because reality hits the road here for a second. There's a company called Accuster, an expert in vitro diagnostics. It's out of India. The Indian Portable Mobile Laboratory Pathology Lab in a suitcase. It does 36 tests. Theranos was promising 200. The president of India got behind it. It has certifications from all kinds of hospitals and groups and ISO certification and US FDA certificate. And it actually works, but you're not hearing about it, are you? It's a real device. But because you didn't have this weird phenomenon that plays into human psychology is what happened with Theranos again. Not only was she connected and played that whole line out, we are gullible. We want to believe. And that's a great thing about the human spirit, that we want to believe that things can happen and that we have answers. And I love that. Remember snake oil? Snake oil salesman? Yeah, that term comes from something real in the 19th century in the United States. And it was fake. Of course, it didn't actually even contain real snake oil and it wasn't dangerous, but it's a real thing. And of course, now there's some science that says, hey, snake oil might actually have some really good things for us. And but snake oil salespeople have always worked. But not only that, people have understood how to play the game exactly that Theranos did. We've heard of things like Ponzi schemes, and we know all about recent scandals around billions of dollars being swindled. What are you talking about? Enron and others. But there's a story that you might not know. A guy named Whitaker Wright did something he was a real swindler, and he did almost what Elizabeth Holmes is accused of doing, where he got the Marquess of Dufferin and Ava, former Viceroy of India, to become chairman of this kind of fake company he created called the London and Globe Company, and she got behind it, and then that started impressing everybody else to attract other wealthy investors. And that put him in the middle of this late Victorian English society. Hey, Elizabeth Holmes in Silicon Valley, playing in those in those circles with the Googles and everybody else. But by the way, the one group that actively denied investing in Theranos was Google Ventures, who told Business Insider in October 2015 he decided not to invest in Theranos because he had questions about the company's technology. Nobody else ever asked for audited financial reports like you would of any other company you're going to spend billions of dollars on or invest billions of dollars or millions of dollars, millions of dollars in. She lied about everything according to the SEC and the president of the company. So we need to be smarter. We need to be looking wider. We need to be breaking these weird circles of everybody preying on the human psychology of, oh, you're going to invest in this company, I better too. Now, I will say this in defense of people, not that they need my defense at all. in defense of some of these investors, like the Larry Ellisons and the Rupert Murdochs, well, maybe not Rupert Murdoch, but Larry Ellison, to a guy like Larry Ellison who has as many billions as he really does have, somebody comes to me and says, hey, there's this really promising startup in med tech and in Silicon Valley. Why don't you seed 10 million? This is going to be a multi-billion dollar company real soon. Give us 10 million now. That'll return, 100 times if this thing takes off. To a guy like Larry Ellison, 10 million, no biggie, right? I mean, I get that. Even to Tim Draper. But how she got to Tim Draper is they're family friends. Nobody else with that cockamamie idea and never showing it's not a cockamamie idea. The idea is fantastic. No ability to execute, as we find out. No audited financial reports. None of this stuff. There's no way a guy like Tim Draper allows me to walk into his office and pitch this idea and get away with it. And what else is weird about this? When I was watching this, I had such an emotional reaction to it is, I've been in tech a lot of my life, and I was a director of a publicly traded software company in the late 1990s in the manufacturing space. And as the tech boom was happening in Silicon Valley and San Francisco in the late 90s, one of my sisters went out to go work for one of these startups, and I started looking at them, and I was getting, I am not exaggerating, recruiter phone calls once a week. You're a director at a publicly traded software company. All of these startups in Silicon Valley want somebody like you. They need a new VP of sales, of business development, director of business development, this, that, and the other. Every time I looked into it, every single time I looked into these companies, I was like, but how are you ever going to make money? I don't understand how you're going to make money. You got a really neat idea, but eventually you got to make money. I don't see how you're making money. I didn't buy into any of them. I mean, obviously, Amazon didn't recruit me, and I'm glad that didn't happen because I'd be kicking myself for having missed that opportunity. But there was at one point really early on, I was looking at Intel, and that would have been really neat to work for them. But basically, every single company that I looked at in the late 1990s no longer exists because they weren't real companies. These were weird fake promises, this idea, these bubbles. And I love investing in ideas, and I think that venture capital has a really important place in these. But you got to do your due diligence. And what Theranos showed was when you let the emotion take over and you don't do your proper due diligence before investing, and if you're only doing it because you're connected to somebody, that's wrong. And that's one of those key things that we're trying to overturn in this world. That's one of the reasons I'm a fan of the estate tax that Elizabeth Warren and others are talking about, and why intergenerational wealth transfer at death is something that we need to look at. This shouldn't be the case where we have this aristocracy. That was one of the things we left behind when we left Europe. Anyway, I really encourage you to watch The Inventor. Share your thoughts with me. I want to hear them as well. Comment on social media, of course. Like, share, subscribe. Send me your thoughts. leftcoastnews@ethanbehrman.com.